welcome back to chapter 3 of Momo. Momo is a really beautiful book. I'm really enjoying reading it, and it's part of me reading books as a way to link to people around the world who might be struggling or just needing a comfortable book to cuddle up and listen to. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I'm enjoying it, and it's really nice to hear positive feedback of people who've been listening. It helps me not to miss you all so much. So today you can see I'm wearing my very serious reading glasses, and a really good thing about these glasses is that, you know, sometimes you're reading a book and you get an itch on your eye and you have to like go around and it's really awkward and everything. Well, these ones, right, you get an itch, you can itch without the glass getting in the way. It's really good, and they help everything to work better. So the last thing to do is say, are you sitting comfortably?
Yes.
What was that?
I'm not sitting.
You're not sitting?
No?
Are you lying, sitting, standing, or hovering comfortably?
Yes, very, thank you.
And I'll begin. Although Momo listens to grown-ups and children with equal sympathy and attention, the children had a special reason for enjoying their visits to the Amphitheater as much as they did. Now that she was living there, they found that they could play games better than ever before. They were never bored for an instant, but not because she contributed a lot to the ingenious suggestions. Momo was there and joined in, that was all. But for some reason, her mere presence put bright ideas into their heads. They invented new games every day, and each was an improvement on the last. One hot and sultry afternoon, a dozen or so children were sitting around on the stone steps waiting for Momo, who had gone for a stroll nearby, as she sometimes did. From the look of the sky, which was filled with fat black clouds, there would soon be a thunderstorm. I'm going home, said one girl, who had a little sister with her. Thunder and lightning scares me. What about when you're at home? Asked the boy in glasses. Doesn't it scare you there? Of course it does, she said. Then you may as well stay, said the boy. The girl shrugged her shoulders and nodded. After a while she said, but maybe Momo won't turn up. So what? Another voice broke in. It belonged to a rather ragged and neglected-looking boy. Even if she doesn't, we can still play a game. All right. But what? I don't know. Something or other. Something or other is no good. Anyone got an idea? I know, said a fat boy with a high-pitched voice. Let's pretend the Amphitheater is a ship and we sail across uncharted seas and have adventures. I'll be the captain, you can be the first mate, and you can be my professor, a scientist, because it's a scientific expedition. The rest of you can be the sailors. What about us girls? Came a plaintive chorus. What'll we be? Girl sailors. It's a ship for the future. The fat boy's idea sounded promising. They tried it out, but everyone started squabbling and the game never got underway. Before long they were all sitting around on the steps again waiting. Then Momo turned up and everything changed. The Argo's bow rose and fell, and she swiftly but steadily steamed through the swell towards the South Coral Sea. No ship in living memory had ever dared to sail these perilous waters, which abounded with shoals, reefs, and mysterious sea monsters. Most deadly of all was the so-called travelling tornado, a waterspout that forever roamed this sea like some cunning beast of prey. The waterspout's route was quite unpredictable, and any ship caught in its mighty embrace was promptly reduced to matchwood. Being a research vessel, of course, the Argo had been specially designed to tackle the travelling tornado. Her hull was entirely constructed of adamantine, a steel as tough and flexible as a sword blade, and had been cast in one piece by a special process that dispensed with rivets and welded seams. For all that, few captains and crews would have had the courage to face such an incredible hazard. Captain Gordon of the Argos had that courage. He gazed down proudly from the bridge at the men and women of his crew, all of whom were experts in their particular field. Beside him stood his first mate, Jim Ironside, an old salt who had already survived 127 hurricanes. Stationed on the sun deck further aft were Professor Einstein, the expedition's senior scientist, and his assistants, Moira and Sarah, who had as much information stored in their prodigious memories as a whole reference library. All three were hunched over their precision instruments, quietly conferring in complicated scientific jargon. Seated cross-legged and a little apart from them was Momo-san, a beautiful native girl. Now and again the professor would consult her about some special characteristic of the South Coral Sea, and she would reply in her melodious hula dialect, which she alone could understand. The purpose of the expedition was to discover what caused the travelling tornado, and if possible make the sea safe for other ships by putting an end to it. So far, however, there had been no sign of the tornado, and all was quiet. Quite suddenly, the captain's thoughts were interrupted by a shout from the lookout in the crow's nest. "Captain!" he called down, cupping his hands round his mouth. "Unless I'm crazy, there's a glass island dead ahead of us." The captain and Jim Ironside promptly levelled their telescopes. Professor Einstein and his two assistants hurried up, bursting with curiosity, but the beautiful native girl calmly remained seated. The peculiar customs of her tribe forbade her to seem inquisitive. When they reached the glass island, as they very soon did, the professor scrambled down a rope ladder and gingerly stepped ashore. The surface was not only transparent, but so slippery that he found it hard to keep his footing. The island was circular and about 50 feet across, with a sort of dome in the centre. On reaching the summit, the professor could distinctly make out a light flashing deep in the heart of the island. He passed his information to the others, who were eagerly lining the ship's rail. "From what you say," said Moira, "it must be a Blancmangius vesicosus." "Perhaps," Sarah explained, it chimed in, "though it could equally be a Jellybeanii multicolorata." Professor Einstein straightened up and adjusted his glasses. "In my opinion," he said, "we're dealing with a variety of common chocolatus indigestibilitis, but we can't be sure till we have examined it from below." The words were scarcely out of his mind when 3 girl sailors, all of whom were world-famous scuba divers and had already pulled on their wetsuits, plunged over the side and vanished into the blue depths. Nothing could be seen for a while but air bubbles. Then one of the girls, Sandra, shot to the surface. "It's a giant jellyfish!" she gasped. "The other 2 are caught up in its tentacles and can't break loose. We must save them before it's too late." So saying, she disappeared again. Without hesitation, 100 frogmen led by Commander Franco, nicknamed the Dolphin because of his skill and experience, dived into the water. A tremendous battle raged beneath the surface, which soon became covered with foam, but the gigantic creature's strength was such that not even 100 brave men could release the girls from its terrible embrace. The professor turned to his assistant with a puzzled frown. Something in these waters seems conducive to the growth of abnormally large sea creatures, he observed. What an interesting phenomena. Meanwhile, Captain Gordon and his first mate had come to a decision. Back! Shouted Jim Ironside. All hands back on board. We'll have to slice the monster in half. It's the girl's only hope. Or maybe it's no monster. Dolphin, Franco and his frogmen climbed back on board. After going astern for a short distance, the Argo headed straight at the jellyfish at maximum speed. The steel ship's bow was as sharp as a razor. Without a sound, almost without a jolt, it sliced the huge creature in half. Although this maneuver was fraught with danger for the girls, entangled in the tentacles, Jim Ironside had gouged his course to within a hair's breadth and steered right between them. Instantly the tentacles on each half of the jellyfish were limp and lifeless, and the trapped girls managed to extricate themselves. They were welcomed back on board with joy. Professor Einstein hurried over to them. It was my fault, he said. I should never have sent you down there. Forgive me for risking your lives like that. There's nothing to forgive, Professor, one of the girls replied with a carefree laugh. It's what we came for after all. Danger's our trade, the other girl put in. But there was no time to say more because of the rescue operation, the captain and his crew had completely forgotten to keep watch on the sea. Only now in the nick of time did they become aware that the travelling tornado had appeared on the horizon and was racing towards them. An immense roller tossed the Argo into the air, hurled her on her side, and sent her plummeting into a watery abyss. Any crew less courageous and experienced than the Argos would have been washed overboard or paralysed with fear by the very first onslaught. But Captain Gordon stood foursquare on his bridge as though nothing had happened, and his sailors were just as unperturbed. Momo-san, the beautiful native girl, just being unaccustomed to such storm-tossed seas, was the only person to take refuge in a lifeboat. The whole sky turned pitch black within seconds. Shrieking and roaring, the tornado flung itself at the Argo, alternatively catapulting her sky high and sucking her down into cavernous troughs. Its fury seemed to grow with every passing minute as it strove in vain to crush the ship's steel hull. The captain calmly gave orders to his first mate, who passed them on to the crew in a stentorian voice. Everyone remained at his or her post. Professor Einstein and his assistants, far from abandoning their scientific instruments, used them to estimate where the eye of the storm must be, for that was, of course, the course to steer. Captain Gordon secretly marvelled at the composure of these scientists, who were not, after all, as closely acquainted with the sea as himself and his crew. A shaft of lightning zigzagged down and struck the ship's hull, electrifying it from stern to stern. Sparks flew whenever the crew touched anything, but none of them were worried. Everyone on board had spent months training hard for just such an emergency. The only trouble was the thinner parts of the ships, cables and stanchions, for instance, began to glow like filaments in electric light bulbs, and this made the crews work harder despite the rubber gloves they were wearing. Unfortunately, the glow was soon extinguished by a downpour heavier than anyone on board, with the exception of Jim Ironside, had ever experienced. There was no room for any air between the raindrops. They were too close together, so they all had to put on masks and breathing apparatus. Flashes of lightning and peals of thunder followed one another in quick succession. The wind howled and mast-high breakers deluged everything with foam. With all engines running full ahead, the Argos inched her way forward against the elemental might of the storm. Down below the boiler rooms, engineers and stokers made superhuman efforts. They had lashed themselves in place with stout ropes so that the ship's violent pitching and tossing would not hurl them into the open furnaces. But when, at long last, the Argo and her crew reached the innermost eye of the storm, what a sight confronted them! Gyrating on the surface of the sea, which had been ironed flat as a pancake by the sheer force of the storm, was a huge figure, seemingly poised on one leg. It grew wider and higher. It grew wider, and the higher one looked like a mountainous humming top rotating too fast for the eye to make it out in any detail. A Teetotum Elasticum, the professor exclaimed gleefully, holding on to his glasses to prevent them from being washed off of his nose in the rain. Maybe you'd care to translate that, growled Jim Ironside. We're only simple seafaring folk, and... Don't bother the professor now, Sarah broke in, or you'll ruin a unique opportunity. This spinning top creature probably dates from the earlier phase of life on Earth. It must be over 1 billion years old. The one variety known today is so small you can only see it under a microscope. It's sometimes found in tomato ketchup, or even more rarely in chewing gum. A specimen as big as this may well be the only one in existence. But we're here to eliminate it, said the captain, shouting to make himself heard above the sound of the storm. All right, Professor, tell us how to stop that infernal thing. Your guess is as good as mine, the professor replied. We're scientists, have never had a chance to study it. Very well, said the captain. We'll try a few shots at it and see what happens. What a shame, the professor said sadly. Fancy shooting the sole surviving specimen of a Teetotum Elasticum. But the anti-friction gun had already been trained on the giant spinning top. Fire! Ordered the captain. The twin barrels emitted a tongue of flame a mile long. There was no bang, of course, because an anti-friction gun, as everyone knows, bombards its target with proteins. The flaming missiles shrieked towards the Teetotum, but were caught and deflected. They circled the huge figure a few times, travelling ever faster, ever higher, until they disappeared into the black clouds overhead. It's no use, Captain Gordon shouted. We'll simply have to get closer. We can't, sir, Jim Ironside shouted. The engines are already running full ahead. That's only just enough to keep us from being blown astern. Any suggestions, Professor? The captain asked, but Professor Einstein merely shrugged. His assistants were equally devoid of ideas. It looked as if the expedition would have to be abandoned as a failure. Just then, someone tugged at the professor's sleeve. It was Momo-san, the beautiful native girl. Malumba, she said, gesturing gracefully. Malumba oistitut sono. Aiweni, samba in saltu, lolubindra, kramuna, hai beni sadugao. The professor raised his eyebrows. Banubola? He said, inquiringly. Didi maha finosi into gi doinen maluba. The beautiful native girl nodded eagerly. Dodo alpha shulhamat avada, she replied. Oi, oi, said the professor, thoughtfully stroking his chin. What does she say? Asked the first mate. She says, explained the professor, that her tribe has a very ancient song that would send a travelling tornado to sleep, or would if anyone were brave enough to sing it to the creature. Don't make me laugh, growled Jim Ironside. Whoever heard of singing a tornado to sleep? What do you think, Professor? Asked Sarah. Is it scientifically feasible? One should always try to keep an open mind, said the professor. Many of these native traditions contain a grain of truth. The Teetotum Elasticum may be sensitive to certain sonic vibrations. We simply know too little about its mode of existence. It can't do any harm, the captain said firmly. So let's give it a try. Tell her to carry on. The professor turned to Momo-san and said, Malumba didi oisafal huna vavadu. She nodded and began to sing the most peculiar song. It consisted of a handful of notes repeated over and over again. Aini mani alubani vanate susarateni. Aini memi alubani vanate susarateni. Aini mani alubani vanate susarateni. As she sang, she clapped her hands and pranced around in time to the refrain. The tune and the words were so easy to remember that the rest joined in, one after another, until the entire crew was singing, clapping and cavorting around in time to the music. Nothing could have been more astonishing than to see the professor himself and that old sea dog, Jim Ironside, singing and clapping like children in a playground. And then, lo and behold, the thing they never thought would happen came to pass. The travelling tornado rotated more and more slowly until it came to a stop and began to sink beneath the waves. With a thunderous roar, the sea closed over it. The storm died away, the rain ceased, the sky became blue and cloudless, and the waves subsided. The Argo lay motionless on the glittering surface, as if nothing but peace and tranquility had ever reigned there. Members of the crew, said Captain Gordon, with an appreciative glance at each in turn. Members of the crew, said Captain Gordon, with an appreciative glance at each in turn. We pulled it off. The captain never wasted words, they all knew, so they doubtly delighted when he added, I'm proud of you all. I think it must really have been raining, said the girl who had brought her little sister along. I'm soaked, that's for sure. She was right. The real storm had broken and moved on, and no one was more surprised than she to find that she had completely forgotten to be scared of the thunderstorm and lightning while sailing aboard the Argo. The children spent some time discussing their adventurous voyage and swapping personal experiences. They said goodbye and went home to dry off. The only person slightly dissatisfied with the outcome of the game was the boy who wore glasses. Before leaving, he said to Momo, "I still think it was a shame to sink the Teetotum Elasticum. Just like that. The last surviving specimen of its kind. Imagine! I do wish I could have taken a closer look at it." But on one point they all agreed. The games they played with Momo were more fun than any others. I hope you enjoyed listening to that. That was great fun. Yeah, join me for chapter 4 next time. I'm going to keep on reading the chapters every day until I've got them all through, and they should be uploaded onto the Momo playlist on my channel. So keep on checking in for them, and I look forward to hearing back from you guys. Loads of love. I hope you're doing okay. Sending you all love for everything that's going on, and keep connected with each other, and we'll get through this. Loads of love. Bye for now.